Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and today we have a new blue post about Dragonflight professions. And there's some analysis to be done here about how some of these things are going to impact high-end raiders. So some of this has already been spoiled, been previewed in the Dragonflight stuff earlier. Let's just really quick go through what some of these things are. So 3 main pillars to revamp professions. One is crafting orders, which is basically a way that you can put a crafting recipe that you want done on the auction house, and then a crafter can come along and do that craft for you, basically. And you can provide some of the reagents. They can provide some. Like, you can decide which ones you're going to provide. So this can be useful for you getting something crafted with your bind on pickup reagents, right? Like if this primal convergent is BOP, you know, historically you would need to have crafters that had their own mats for things like that, things like expulsum or primal nethers or whatever. Those sorts of, I don't know, primal nether even was BOP, but those kinds of things, right? The things that you get, like one for killing a dungeon boss, something like that, and that's bind on pickup. You'll be able to get those crafted without having to have crafters using them, which should drive down crafting fees. And then crafters will be able to basically spam these and make a little bit of gold and potentially increase their crafting skill fairly cheaply once they have enough to craft whatever is actually being requested. Now, usually the stuff that you actually want to craft to raise your skill isn't the same stuff that you actually is in demand, right? It's like these green garbage items, but you never know. There might be some opportunity there. But that's not really the big thing. That's not. There's not really too much new in there. That a lot of this was already basically been discussed. Then there's profession specializations, which is another area that is not what this is about, but again, a system with some more depth here. And then what they're really on about in this post is quality crafting. But there are some other important things in some of the bullet points in here that will affect the mythic rating situation for sure. So multiple different quality icons and quality tiers available for all crafted stuff. I guess crafted equipment will always have that. And then crafted and gathered items such as potions and ores will have 3 levels of quality instead. So a piece of crafted leveling gear might be 270 to 280, depending on the different qualities, right? So nice bump, 10 item levels for crafting the highest quality leveling gear, but not a huge deal, right? For crafted items such as consumables that have quality, the effects are a bit more varied. For most, a higher quality will result in a more powerful effect, but in some cases it might have a longer duration or more charges. Note there is an expectation that the low-quality versions will sell for less, but this will provide a niche for those who don't want to spend a lot of gold to be able to make use of the full suite of crafted items, and it'll be cheaper to craft those lower quality ones as well for a variety of reasons. So likely what this means is it's hard to imagine not wanting to use the highest quality version of these, except for cases where it's like, oh, this flask gives you an hour of flask versus 2 hours of flask, right? In which case, okay, you'd buy the cheaper ones if they were less than half the price. But otherwise, it's hard to imagine mythic progression, high-end content being done without using the highest versions of these, at least on prog encounters. But, you know, it's a way to potentially save some gold and use the cheaper ones for other stuff, and it'll be a fun new way for tyrannical guild masters to make sure that all of their people are trying as hard as they're supposed to be and using all of the right stuff. For reagents that have quality, that quality will serve as a major input into crafting. So if you have higher quality ore, that will affect whether you create higher quality outcomes, or will directly provide bonus skill as well when crafting with them. Finishing reagents are a new type of reagent that can be used to improve aspects of the crafting process, increasing skill or crafting stats. Higher quality versions of these will have stronger effects on crafting. So you can see there's reagents that can give you inspiration, crafting speed, and inspiration is a new stat as well. Please note that not all gathered reagents will have quality. Ores, skins, scales, hides, herbs will have quality, as well as reagents crafted by the primary professions, so cloth, bolts, metal alloys. But meat, cloth, fish, and elements that you like loot, like primal fire or whatever, those kind of things, will not have quality. So when crafting an item, there are 2 main elements of note. The recipe difficulty will determine how hard it is to craft the recipe at a higher level, and that will also change as you add optional reagents, which can either make it easier or harder and change the difficulty, right? Like you can see adding guaranteeing different stats can be something that increases the difficulty, but also, guarantees the stats. Your crafting skill is determined by your base skill, but can be modified by things like the reagents used, finishing reagents, profession gear with stat bonuses, which apparently these are going to be for crafting the highest rank stuff. You're going to want a full set of profession gear. Various bonuses provided by consumables, and your profession specialization as well. Your crafting UI will make it clear based on all these factors what quality you're expected to craft your item at. So you can see here, it's like, oh, I guess this item is going to be a tier 4, and you're this close to it being a tier 5 as well. As you craft your item, there's a small amount of randomness added to your skill roll to represent the natural variation in your crafting execution. In addition, if you have any inspiration, you have a chance to become inspired, gaining a significant amount of bonus skill. So with this person with 4% inspiration and that random roll, there's a chance maybe that it turns out to be a tier 5 RNG proc craft. And your final crafting skill gets compared against the difficulty. If the skill is higher than the difficulty, you will craft the item at its maximum quality. Otherwise, the quality will depend on where your skill falls comparatively. So yeah, you can see here this difficulty 325, your skill 292. So you would need to RNG on either the roll or the inspiration up to 325 in order to make it a tier 5 craft. So the other stats that you can get, the crafting stats, are inspiration, which is the chance to be inspired. If you like crafting a bunch of boots and hoping you RNG one of them to be the tier 5 one, inspiration is a way to do that. Resourcefulness is using less reagents. Multi-craft only procs on stackable items, so not great for trying to craft like multiple boots or whatever. But if you're a potion person, presumably this is going to be something that's very high value. And then crafting speed. So obviously like something that if you're spending hours a day crafting, this will be valuable, but otherwise probably a stat you can ignore. So yeah, inspiration, I don't know, depending on how this works, there's a chance that you might not really need any of these for crafting like gear, because there's a good chance you just kind of want to have the guaranteed version of your craft, but yeah. Quality philosophy. Now here's some of the good stuff. So for many earlier and lower tier recipes, right as you learn them, your skill might be low enough you'll tend to craft them at lowest quality, but the recipes aren't meant to be difficult, and through gaining a higher skill, they'll become easy to craft at max quality, even with low quality reagents, right? So these like leveling items, you'll be able to make them at high tiers just by having going from 1 out of 100 skill to 50 or whatever, 75, like you normally do. But high-end recipes, especially ones with the optionals and top-tier consumables, will be extremely difficult to craft at the highest quality. The goal is only the best of the best can make them at the highest quality, and only by using every tool at your disposal. So sort of similar to like old fishing, getting old fishing up to 450 or whatever, using all kinds of different stuff to do that. So if you want to craft mythic chest, mythic eye level gear, yes, this will be possible. Kind of buried the lead here now that we're 7 minutes into this video, but this is the big news here. You have to fully specialize in crafting that type of gear, use all top quality reagents, both required and optional, and use the best profession gear you can find, which would also require highly specialized crafters to make. So potentially this means that this will be difficult to do to the point that the prices of these are fairly high. And, there's something down here that, yeah, okay, here's the thing. Up to 5 crafted pieces can be equipped at once, with 2-handers counting as 2. So you may be looking at purchasing 4 or 5 items at potentially a fairly high degree of expense if you're looking for, but mythic eye level is a real big deal. So that's something that is potentially going to be a big gold sink or a big way for it to make gold if you're a crafter. If we think about stuff like crafting the legendary base items in Shadowlands, right, being a huge way to make gold for some and a huge gold sink for others. So hopefully these crafting systems work in such a way that it's not just like, oh, everybody has to spend 5 million gold to get their 5 pieces each tier, that kind of thing. And hopefully instead it's the kind of thing where you can sort of slot in and, yeah, you can just use gold to do it, but it's like you can participate in the crafting economy as well and actually have gold flowing around the economy. Because I think one of the ways that Shadowlands BFA Legion sort of failed was there wasn't really a good way to be medium involved in crafting and like finance yourself a little bit with the auction house, but not be making huge amounts of gold. In Shadowlands, it sort of felt like people were either making 0 gold and spending all their gold on crafting stuff, or they were like giga invested in the crafting stuff and making a lot of gold from it. So yeah, I hope that this combination of stuff means there's kind of something that lets everybody get involved with it to some extent. And of course, there will be very high-end crafters as well that will be making these mythic gear. But the fact that you can also make heroic gear with like mid investment will be very important as well. And yeah, no small feat to have the best crafted items, or maybe you just spam a bunch of heroic tier items and you get a bunch of inspiration and you hope you RNG it. I don't know. Okay. One main difference for crafting professions, instead of needing to max your skill to learn all recipes, you only need to skill up about halfway, and then you keep on maxing it up. You keep on getting your skill up beyond that, which should be kind of cool. And less items are just to skill up, flooding the market and diminishing their value. I like the sound of that. Yeah, so all of these items are soulbound, the crafted items, so you don't buy the BOEs on the auction house anymore, or the BOE crafted items on the auction house anymore, but they're not really soulbound because you use the crafting order system, which will effectively mean that they will be done through the auction house. It's just a question of what the pricing is going to look like on that. And then, yeah, each piece of crafted equipment will require several types of soulbound reagents. But again, either the crafter or the craftee can provide these using the crafting order system, right? So they're kind of half soulbound, like they're not as restrictive as full soulbound. Like it's not like vanilla stuff where you had to be the blacksmith crafting your own item, right? Like you can still have the other person be the blacksmith. One type of reagent comes from Dungeons Raids PvP. You'll need to earn a fair amount of this to craft a piece of equipment, more for significant pieces. So again, somebody who's like spamming M+, gets a bunch of this material in the first couple weeks, can maybe charge a big premium to be the crafter and use their materials to make these. And yeah, you use this to construct something to bring stuff up to heroic eye level. A second type of reagent will come from a series of quests that award you enough to craft one piece of equipment. And to upgrade equipment to around Mythic, you need to acquire a final reagent that can only be obtained in Mythic raids, highest levels of M+, and highly rated PvP. So, hard to do. Potentially big value for alts is literally just using your alts to farm this material, and then your alts also craft for your main, right? Doing something like this is annoying, right? Because there are only 2 people involved in a crafting order, right? There's the person getting the item, which has to be your main, and then there's the person doing the crafting. So if you want an alt to come in and supply the reagents, they also need to be able to do the crafting. So this may lead to very, very giga degenerate play patterns to try and get like 5 mythic items in the first week or 2, involving like 1 main that is a good crafter and 4 alts that are also good crafters that are farming up mats. They're farming up the soulbound pieces. Yeah, depending on, or if this is not like weekly locked, which I guess only the other reagent's weekly locked, then maybe you can still just do this all on 1 character and get enough of these to craft it. Yeah, this is a huge change to how gearing is going to look. There are some spooky implications as well for split raids, whereby potentially you can craft yourself a full set of heroic items on a character and then equip them and then be able to trade items in that slot and be able to trade, heroic gear in every slot, which hugely increases the efficiency of split raids whenever that's true. Makes it more valuable for guilds lower down the totem pole than just the Race to World First guilds to be doing heroic raids, right? If you can do heroic split and all the loot that drops, you can trade to your mains. That is way more efficient than Shadowlands heroic splits, where you're looking at like, maybe 20% more items because some of the alts will be able to trade some of the items. So potentially a little bit of a worrying thing for that's still that's not just a Race to World First problem. In fact, it doesn't really change much for Race to World First because they're always just going to be doing degenerate stuff in the first few weeks. But for guilds like mine at the World 30 level, that might be something that leads to some extremely degenerate first few weeks of the raid, which we kind of were able to avoid. Especially in like Sepulcher, we ran a split, but we didn't do too much outside of raids to farm and blast like we might have to with this. So we'll see how that works out. But end of the day, improving the crafting system, making the crafting system good. If that ends up being a side effect, I'm pretty sure we can all live with that. Yeah. Also, there's tier anyways, so if tier tradability stays the same, you know, you're not gonna get that much value out of. If you can't trade tier from crafting heroic crafted items, then it doesn't change too much anyways, because that's the big prize anyway. Okay, Alchemy and Phials. One of these is the standardization of the phial as the innovative replacement for the flasks. So phials are basically flasks. They count as both battle and guardian elixirs, but they require half the reagents to craft, last half as long, but you can drink 2 of them together. So you can, instead of having to, like you can just basically just think of them as they've split flasks in half, but they, instead of pandemicing up to an hour and 15 minutes or whatever, they pandemic all the way up to an hour for 30-minute ones. So pretty, that'll just make it a little bit less of a pain. You're a little bit less likely to waste as many of your herbs effectively on flasks that run over their duration, which is cool. So there's a verse flask. There's one that gives you an int buff while you're stationary, and then moving gives you speed. And one that gives you int while you're at least 10 yards away from allies. Yes, I remember. I guess there was that trinket in BOD, but you could stack with other people who had that trinket. I wonder if you can stack with other people with this phial or not. Because of the wide variety you might want to consider, there's no cauldron, but you will find one for the most powerful craftable potions. So I like the sound of that. Just a cauldron that everybody can get their potions for the night out of, and then everybody's carrying a bunch of different phials, potentially, if they balance them well, that you'll want to use them differently on different fights, right? Like you could imagine some fights you could use this phial of charged isolation profitably, and some fights you couldn't. So yeah. And then alchemists will be able to have longer phials for themselves. So for raiding characters that don't want to do too much crafting, choosing an alchemist and choosing phial specialization will likely be a gold saver for yourself. But I think a lot of characters, especially a lot of main characters, are going to want to be interested in being crafters, because it seems like there's a lot of stuff going on here, and it may be an important thing to do to just keep the gold situation okay. One thing I want to hear about is, can we please use NG-Res without being an engineer? It's annoying to be hard locked into being an engineer in order to have access to that. And yeah, that's it. That's the only question I have. Interesting post here. I'm sure that I've misinterpreted some of this and made some assertions that are probably not how it actually works, but it's an interesting thing to think about. It's a cool post. I'll put a link in the description below. Let me know what you think of all of this stuff. And I don't know. To me, it's interesting because I haven't engaged with crafting very much at all in Legion, BFA, or Shadowlands, but when I played 15 years ago back in like TBC and Wrath, I did engage with crafting a lot, and this kind of does rekindle some of that excitement, just the depth of these systems. And it does feel like this kind of may fit in just like the log in and have something that feels good to do in the game, which has been a little bit of a gap in Shadowlands, aside from stuff like, you know, doing M+ or whatever. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.